Hi everyone, and welcome to or welcome back to Stitches Past 5. My name is Vera, and on this channel I like to talk anything that's going on in my knitting life or sometimes my crocheting life. And today I thought I would do a book review, in particular review the book 52 Weeks of Easy Knits. So I own this book myself, and I've owned it for quite a while, a number of months now, so I've had the chance to really, look at it, read the patterns, figure out what I like, what I don't like. I've made a few things of this book in here. So today I thought I would share my opinions and my experience with this book. First I'll give like a quick overview of the book, just some of the specs, and so on and so forth, and then I'll share all the patterns that are in the book without giving anything away, of course, but just so that you get an idea of like what to expect when you're purchasing, or if you're thinking of purchasing this book right here. Yeah, and at the end I'll try to give my honest opinion if it's worth it, and maybe also the type of knitter that would benefit from this book, and also maybe who wouldn't benefit from this book, because I think for this one there are some type of knitters that I think like would not be happy with this book. So I'll talk about all of that at the end. Now, of course, this is my personal opinion about this book. I'm gonna be really honest. I'm gonna, just say what I don't and what I do like about it. So maybe that'll help you. And if you don't agree with that, that's totally fine. Maybe you see positives in what I think is negative and vice versa. Okay, so let's get started with the kind of like more specs of the book, so like the logistics, if you will. So this book is published by Lane Publishing. It comes in a soft cover, as you can see here, and it kind of has these flaps so that I guess you could use them as a bookmark, unless you're working like in the middle of the book. And yeah, it has this beautiful like pinkish salmon-y color. And it is called, 52 Weeks of Easy Knits, Beautiful Patterns for Year-Round Knitting. And that's exactly what this book is. In the 264 pages of the book, there are 52 knitting patterns, as the name suggests. I think some people are thrown off by the weeks of Easy Knits. I think that's literally just what the series is called. It has nothing to do with like the timing of your knits, or like, I don't think it ever really talks about like having to finish all of these in a week or anything. I think it's just kind of like 52 is the amount of weeks in a year, and therefore it's kind of like a nice number for a pattern collection. So in this book are, like I said, 52 knitting patterns, of which there are 15 sweaters, 3 cardigans, 4 vests, 13 shawls/scarves, 7 hats, 2 headbands, 2 balaclavas, 4 mittens or fingerless mittens, and 2 socks. And a nice feature of this book, because it is called like Easy Knits, is that it includes 17 patterns that are classified as like super easy knits. So I guess those are meant to be like just the really like easy, foolproof patterns that are especially beginner friendly. So some of the patterns will be like classified as super easy knit. And then I guess you know what you're getting yourself into when you're starting that. In terms of the sizes that are included in this book, they are like the sweaters and the cardigans and vests all come in 8 different sizes. They do their own sizing, so they do like sizes 1 through 8, but they do state in their description that these sizes go up to a chest circumference of 152 centimeters at minimum in their sweaters, cardigans, and vests, I guess, where it's a little bit more size specific versus like a hat or a headband or something like that. The socks, hats, and mittens also come in 3 different sizes, which I think is really nice and not to be taken for granted, because I think we see a lot of mitten sizes and also sock patterns that just kind of come in 1 size. So it's really nice to see that they have 3 sizes of those included. The language of the book is in English, and there's also like a Finnish version available, I guess, but I think most readers of this book will read it in English. And yeah, it is printed by Lane Publishing. I think Lane Publishing does most knitting books. Like, it's kind of harder to find a knitting book that's not printed by Lane Publishing than to find one that is. And yeah, so I bought this book online and then it was shipped to me. I paid around 37 euros for it, and I've seen it online anywhere between like 30 to 40 euros. On the back it does say like 27 US dollars or 19.99 UK British pounds. But I think like online it is just a little bit more expensive. Maybe this is just an outdated price as well. Okay, then another thing to note is that all the patterns here are from different designers, so it is really like a pattern collection. So that's why you won't like find a designer on the front or the back of the book. And this is part of a series, so it is part of the 52-week series by Lane Publishing. The other ones are 52 weeks of chunky knits, 52 weeks of socks, that one has 2 volumes, 52 weeks of shawls, and 52 weeks of accessories. So this is I have 2 of the series. I also have the 52 weeks of socks, and this is my second purchase of the 52 weeks series. Okay, so as for the structure of the book, like I mentioned, it has 262 pages. And first there's like a pattern overview, I guess, and then it goes into the introductory chapters, which includes like how to read patterns, finishing off the items that you need as a knitter, and so on and so forth, just kind of to give you an introduction to the book. The abbreviations that are used, kind of like all the typical introductory chapters that you would find in a knitting book. But I really appreciate that they've kind of taken the time to really deeply explain everything. It's also coupled with like these beautiful, beautiful pictures that just kind of like makes reading it like a little bit more enjoyable, I guess. Kind of giving like these nice detailed close-ups of the knits, just kind of getting you like inspired or getting you in the knitting mood. Pictures like this one. But yeah, so let's get into the overview of the patterns that are included. Of course, I'm not gonna like mention like all the details of the pattern because there are 52 of them, so it is quite a lot. I will insert like a picture of the pattern that I'm talking about, and then I'll give a few specs, and if I do or don't like this pattern, what I think is cool, maybe what's not cool about it. But yeah, I mean, there's also like all the patterns are bundled on Ravelry as well, if you're really like more into the specs of each individual pattern, like if that's really interesting to you, because I'm just gonna give like a quick overview. The one thing that's also fun in this book, it has like these like chapter dividers. So these are patterns 1 through 13. I don't know if it's meant to be like seasons. I don't know why there's like 4 of these dividers in the book. But I guess it's week 1 through week 13 going with the week theme. I'm really not sure. It does like mention all the designers that are featured in this chapter at the bottom here, but other than that, it's really just a page to kind of flip through. Okay, so the first pattern of the book is a t-shirt knit or designed by Jenny Ansah, and it is called Give Me the Tea. Yeah, it is knit up at a gauge of 22 stitches and 26 rows on 2.5 and 3mm needles. Yeah, and it is this raglan t-shirt that's pretty like loose fitting, kind of like the wider style that's pretty modern again now, I guess. The nice thing that I do like with these patterns is that it gives you a yarn recommendation. So it says like materials, the yarn you should use, how many skeins you need, but then it also gives like a modification. So for example, for this t-shirt, it's recommended that, or the materials listed is a double skein, a yarn held double. But then under modifications, it says that you can also knit the sweater with only 1 strand of yarn. For 1-stranded version, you will need approximately, and then it lists all the meterages and yardages of like the thickness of a sport weight yarn that you need for each size, which is so lovely. I don't see that enough in patterns, I find, but when I see it, because I'm someone who usually doesn't follow the recommended yarn, and that it can be hard when a designer uses like 2 strands of this held with 1 strand of mohair, that to me is very complicated to then like convert it into the yarn that I have available. But every one of these patterns has the modification of yarns, and I think that's like really, really nice. Yeah, especially when you're like me and you don't buy a yarn that's like suggested. So I already have the yarn for this pattern because it really speaks to me. I think the cut is really nice. I did buy Drops Bell for this pattern, so it is like a lighter linen yarn or a linen mix, and I'm really excited to make it once the summer comes around. The second pattern is called Vitter, and it is by Ida Vurak-Tretovic. It is knit on 9 and 10 millimeter needles. It's a super thick gauge, and the gauge is 9 stitches and 16 rows on 10 centimeters, and it is just this really oversized slipover, I guess. Yeah, I'm like okay about this pattern. I don't think it's one that I'm like super excited to make right away, but I do think if I have like a nice thick yarn that this could be a nice option. It's not really my style usually, so this is probably one that I'll just kind of flip through for now at least. Third pattern is the first super easy pattern in the book, and this one is called Arthur by Jonna Hietala. This is a hat, so it comes in 3 sizes and not in the 8 for all the like tops and sweaters, and this one is knit at a gauge of 12.5 stitches, also on 9 millimeter needles. It's a super chunky hat. Yeah, I think if I have the yarn for it, I will make it. I don't have really chunky yarn like that at the moment, and you'll also see that this is kind of a trend that kind of goes throughout this book, is that the yarns are all really heavy or chunky in that sense, although this is not even like the chunky knits book, because there's also some sprinkled in there that are not super thick. Pattern number 4 is also a super easy pattern, and this one is by Julia Wilkins. This is a scarf, so it comes in just 1 size, and it is knit at a gauge of 15 stitches on 3.75 millimeter needles in moss stitch. So I guess a good project to practice your moss stitch if you have not done that before, or if you just like the stitch and want to make a scarf out of it. I think here and throughout this whole book, again, the pictures are really fun. The pictures are really inspiring. They make me want to make these items right away. I love the colors of the scarf, and I love how the moss stitch with the combination of the colors kind of like blends the stripes a little bit. I think that's really, really pretty. Yeah, the pattern is called Paula. I don't know if I mentioned that. The next one is a sweater by Vera Välimäki. It sounds very Finnish, that name, and this sweater is called Suppressi, and it is also a super easy pattern. This is a oversized sweater with like some nice thinner stripes. It is a seamless top-down construction, and yeah, they suggest that it's a really good like first sweater design that you could try to make. I think seeing a sweater and seeing it labeled as super easy, if you're a beginner knitter, that's really reassuring and that's really motivating. This one is knit on 4 millimeter and 5 millimeter needles at a gauge of 14 stitches and 20 rounds. Yeah, and I think, again, this book, beautiful pictures, really cool like alternative color combination that like I would never pair an ochre yellow with a pink, but I think it works. Yeah, so that's the Suppressi sweater, the 5th pattern. The 6th pattern is called Audrey by Jonna Hietala again. This is also a super easy pattern. This is a headband, comes in 1 size, and is knit at a gauge of 23 stitches on 4 millimeter needles. I think this is one of those patterns. It's just so simple. Like, sure, I'll make a headband, I guess, if you have a scrap yarn lying around. I guess this serves more as inspiration, what you can do with little yarn and maybe little time, versus it actually being like a pattern that you need to buy a book for. I like the headband, I like how it looks. I don't know, I guess if I have scrap yarn, like why not make it, right? But for now, it's also a pattern that I'm not gonna go out and buy the yarn for just to specifically make this one. It's also a super easy pattern. The next pattern, number 7, is by Isabel Kramer and is called Helmi. It is a yoke sweater with this like mosaic pattern, and it's like a slip stitch colorwork technique. So I guess for a beginner knitter that might be something new, but the pattern explains that you do only knit it with 1 color at a time. So I guess it's a good introduction to colorwork. This one is made on 3.5 and 3.75 millimeter needles, and has a gauge of 21 stitches and 33 rows. The next pattern is a funky one. It is by Tina Arporen, and it is called Eloisa. I hope I'm reading that correctly. And it is this really funky, fun colored scarf with a pretty thick gauge. And I think it's just a really fun way to practice your color work if that's something that you want to do, and if you're kind of more the colorful knitter out there. It's knit at a gauge of 16 stitches on 6mm needles, and yeah, I think this is definitely a design that, like, I think personally it's not really my taste, but I will definitely, like, if I see someone wearing this on the street, I'm going to be really impressed and probably think that, wow, this is so cool. I wish I you know, could pull that off as well. It is very funky, but I think it's also very fun and probably a very unique piece if you do make this one. The 9th pattern is by Maddie Moe and it is called Grand Stuff. It is a sock pattern and it is also knit with only one color at a time, although it is a colorwork sock. It comes in 3 sizes and is knit on 3mm needles at a gauge of 28 stitches and 40 rounds in 10 centimeters. These are fun socks. I mean, I might make them. I always kind of like flipped through the socks because I wasn't really in a sock phase, but now seeing these, I could be inspired. The next pattern I've actually talked about here before because I am currently in the process of making it still, and it is pattern number 10 by Nina Pomeranc, and that is the Diamond Twill. It is a vest and it's knitted in this like pearl knit combination that it creates this diamond pattern. Yeah, and I'm currently on the blocking board because I want to block it before I add the ribbing for the neck and the sleeves, or the armholes, I guess. The gauge that's suggested is 16 stitches and 22 rounds, and the needles are 4mm and 4.5mm needles. I did do some like playing around with the gauge and I also had to like undo it because it was way too big. Not sure if that was my error. Other people don't seem to have that issue, so I guess it was my error. But I think this is a really fun vest and I'm really enjoying making it. It's keeping you with all the knits and purls, like it keeps you just engaged enough that it's not like stuck in it, but it's also like, at least for me, once I'm into the pattern, it's not super intricate. Like I can definitely watch TV on the side and it can definitely be kind of like a half mindful or half mindless pattern, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that's the Diamond Twill vest. Pattern number 11 is called Marley and the designer is Sasha Heyer. It is this long, like oversized type cardigan, and yeah, it uses different yarns, which is really cool. That, like, I don't know, even just the idea of that is really fun. I've always made projects with just one yarn, like I've never alternated yarns. And yeah, this is, I guess if you don't want to make the pattern, use it as inspiration. The gauge of this pattern is 22 stitches by 30 rows and it's made on 4.5mm circular needles. I think this is definitely going to be like a really big project. The cardigan is super long, it's like almost down to, or at least this model's knees. Of course, something that you can adjust, but if you are making this to the size that's suggested here, it'll be like a pretty big project. I think I've kind of kept away from it because it is so long. Like I'm not, or at least I think I'm not really like a long cardigan type of person. Maybe this will change it. Maybe if I have the time and like the yarns, then I will try this because it does look really nice and appealing. The 12th pattern is another super easy pattern and it is called Duo by Paulina Kuhnsola. And they are these mittens that are just like a pretty big gauge, very easy to knit supposedly. I mean, it is a super easy pattern on 5mm needles, and the gauge is 14 stitches by 22 rounds. It is a very thick gauge, especially for mittens. Yeah, and I think even if you don't make them in 2 colors, they're just a basic pair of mittens, which I think again is not the reason that I bought this book, but it's nice that they're in here to just have like a vanilla mitten pattern somewhere, but definitely not like what I would buy this book for. The next pattern is called True Stripes and it is actually what is on the cover, so the one that's like behind all the writing here. This is also a funky one. It is like this sweater that is seamed together and that is in these crazy wild stripes. Of course you can kind of tone it down by using like more muted colors, but this one is knit at a gauge of 18 stitches and 38 rows, all in garter stitch, on 4mm and 5mm needles. And this one is just like, it's fun. It kind of reminds me like of one of those really funky Patagonia fleeces that or just like bring a little touch of color. The pattern designer is Sylvia Watts Cherry, and I do have this one bookmarked, so maybe you'll be seeing me making this very crazy wild sweater. Okay, so that already brings us into the next chapter, which again, we have this divider, 14 to 26, I guess, with all the pattern designers listed at the bottom. I really don't know, like, can someone explain to me what these like dividers are for? Maybe it's just like a art touch. But anyways, like, it's nice to look at. Like, I look at a 14 and a 26. But without further ado, the 14th pattern is called Lullaby by Jonna Hietala. It is also a super easy pattern, also worked in garter stitch, and it is this cardigan, like super chunky cardigan, with like shorter sleeves, but I guess you can always make them longer if that is not your style. It is knit at a gauge of 11.5 stitches on 20 rows, in garter stitch, and knit on 10mm and 8mm needles, so really thick needles again. Yeah, and I mean, I don't think you can do much wrong with a really chunky cardigan. It's not really on my knitting list. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's the short sleeves that don't really speak to me, but I think it's a like nice pattern for lots of people out there. Pattern number 15 is called, it has a German name, so it's called Abgerundet, and it is also a super easy pattern. It is essentially this long, like, straight scarf with rounded off edges, which is what Abgerundet means in German. The pattern designer is Evgenia Dupli, and yeah, the gauge is 14 stitches and 10 centimeters in garter stitch, or 14 stitches and 26 rows, I should say, in garter stitch. On 6.5mm needles, and it essentially features like these like pearl knit stitch pattern combinations that kind of form the scarf. Next, pattern number 16 is called Enkel by Meiju KP as the designer, and Enkel is essentially this sweater that features these stripes, but instead of a colorwork stripe, the stripes are worked in pearls. The sleeves again are half length, and the whole sweater kind of features this like cropped like vibe style. This sweater is knit up in 5.5 and 4.5mm needles and 4mm needles, and at a gauge of 14 stitches by 20 rows in stockinette stitch. And I actually really like the sweater. I just don't at the moment have yarn. So we live really close to the airport, so we get like the noise from the planes, I guess. And it's so windy today, I literally just saw the plane like skid in the sky. But I think we're fine. Anyways, so Enkel, the sweater, I really like this one. I just am a bit cautious of making a sweater in like such a big gauge. But I think I will just kind of go for it once I have the yarn for it. I think 14 stitches is a really big gauge, at least for me, for sweaters. But I think it just also means that it's going to work up really quickly. I really like the way it looks. Like, I like the cropped version. I will probably make the sleeves a little bit longer. Next, we have another super easy pattern, and this one is also by Jonna Hietala. This is pattern number 17, and it's called Birk, or Birke. I'm not sure. This is a shawl. It's an asymmetrical shawl. This is also knit in garter stitch at a gauge of 14 stitches and 24 rows, knit on 7mm needles. So it's also quite a thick, like, or quite a big gauge, I guess. Yeah, and I think where can you go wrong with a nice shawl? I really like this pattern as well. I haven't made it yet though, nor do I have the yarn at home. Then the sweater that kind of breaks the like trends with the thick gauges in this book is the Kupla sweater, pattern number 18, designed by Maya Kangasluoma. This sweater is knit in gauge of 26 stitches and 48 rows and 10 centimeters. And it's knit on 3mm and 3.5mm needles. And this one features this bubble pattern in color work or like in alternating colors. I really like this one. I think the color combination in the sample is really pretty, and I think it's also a really nice way to kind of break up all the chunky sweaters. So I think like once I find the right yarn for this, and I think the color combination for this, like I'm definitely gonna write this on my list of projects. I'm less scared of the 26 stitches gauge, I think, and more intrigued by the bubble like pattern, because I've also not really worked anything like a bubble texture before. Very interesting. The next pattern is by Sidsel Grau Pedersen, and it is called Marta. This is a garter stitch vest knit in a gauge of 12 stitches on 5.5 and 6mm needles. Again, very effective vest in a pretty big gauge. And yeah, can probably pair it with most things. This one is knit sideways, that's kind of like the funky part to it, and then they suggest that you embroider stripes on it, which I think is also a cool thing. Next we have a balaclava, I think they're called. This one is called Marshmallow, and it is by Tina Hutaniemi, and it is like a garter stitch balaclava with like a 2x2 ribbing around the head, and yeah, I'm not really a balaclava lover, I have to say. It is knit at a gauge of 15 stitches by 30 rows in garter stitch on 4.5 and 5mm needles. I think for me, I haven't really gotten into the balaclava thing yet. I will stay optimistic that I maybe will, but for me this is also a pattern that I'll be skipping for now. The next is another sock pattern. This one is by Sini Krama, and it is called Lemonade, I guess because of the pattern samples color. This is a super easy pattern, and it is knit at a gauge of 36 stitches on 2.25mm needles, so it's just a little bit thinner than regular sock yarn. I think these are fun, I think these are nice. It's always nice to have like an easy sock pattern that's maybe not in your regular gauge, I guess. Because I think for me my sock wool is always between 28 and 32 stitches, depending like how tight I knit and what needles I use. But it's nice to have like a nice easy sock pattern. I think this also goes in the category of like not the reason I bought this book, but nice to have it in there. The next is another scarf pattern. It is by Lindsay Fowler, and it is called Fledgling. This is pattern number 22, another super easy pattern. It is a scarf, so there's only one size, and it is made in a gauge of 18 stitches in 25 rows on 5mm needles. The next pattern is one that kind of caught my eye as soon as I saw this book, and that is pattern 23 called Comfy by Paula Pereira. It is like a sweater that is worked in like a slipped stitch ribbing. Yeah, and it is worked according to a chart with a gauge of 24 stitches in 32 rounds, like in that like chart, the slip stitch rib. That equates to 18 stitches and 24 rounds in stockinette stitch. It's worked on 5mm and 4mm needles, and it just looks like a very like doable pattern. Like I'm really intrigued by this, so I will also put it like on my list, not right now, but probably in the near future. The next one is a hat, and it is called Pisama by Polina Kunsala, also a super easy pattern. Yeah, and the hat features this beautiful like cute little, I mean they look like love hearts because it's like in the stitch, right? But just this beautiful color detail that kind of just like make the whole hat. I almost made this hat actually, but then I bought yarn that ended up being the wrong gauge. So then I was like, you know what, I'm not gonna bother, I'm gonna make a different pattern. But this was pretty close to being made by me at one point. Pattern number 25 is called Palette by Bernice Lim. And this one is a very interesting like t-shirt knitted sideways. And then the ribbing is added at the end. It is a color block sweater, which I think is always like, it's so fun. I also like, I spent time looking for yarn for this and I couldn't really find something, and then I ended up buying so much other yarn. But this one is on my list, just not sure when, once I find the yarn, I guess. The thing is, it is a t-shirt knit at a gauge of 16 stitches, so it is quite thick on 4mm needles. That to me just sounds like a very thick gauge, especially on like 4mm needles, which are quite thin. But I still like love it, and I really like the colors in the in the sample, so I will still be making this one. Yeah, and this one is also like one of the longest patterns, so it might be one of the more complicated ones, which is a bit not sure by looking at it. Pattern number 26 is called Dip Dye, and it is a scarf designed by Elise Damstra, another super easy pattern, and it is worked in linen stitch, so that's kind of fun. And yeah, it's like dip dye because of the coloring that's created, I guess, by alternating skeins, like in the color transition area. It is at a gauge of 14 stitches and 25 rows in linen stitch, worked on 8mm needles. We are now halfway through, so now we're at 27 to 39, I guess. So pattern 27 is called Korali by Megumi Shinagawa. And it is like a short sleeve t-shirt slash sweater, like pretty relaxed fit. And it's in this like beautiful mosaic pattern at the bottom and at the neckline. This one is knit at a gauge of 16 stitches by 23 rows on 5mm needles. Pattern number 28 is called Hilpa by Anna Heino. It is another shawl or scarf worked in garter knit stitch, and then you make like these baubles that you then decorate, I guess, after you make it. It is knit at a gauge of 24 stitches on 4mm needles. I guess it's nice to have like a plain garter stitch scarf somewhere in there. This, I will say, also going in the category of not the reason I bought this book, but nice to have. The next sweater is called Rattan, number 29, and by Luan Chao. It is like a cropped sweater in stockinette stitch, and I think it lives off of like the yarn that it's suggested to be knit in, which is like this very fluffy yarn. It is knit at a gauge of 10 stitches by 60 rounds on 6.5mm needles and 5.5mm needles. So I think this is also going to be a very thick, chunky sweater. Pattern number 30 is another super easy pattern. It is called Cresta, and it is another shawl. This one is a triangular shawl. This one actually comes in 2 sizes, so that's fun. It's knit at a gauge of 20 stitches by 28 rows in stockinette stitch, or 20 stitches by 36 rows in garter stitch on 5mm needles. And yeah, this one is also super easy pattern, which I think looks really effective, so nice one to have in there. Pattern number 31 is by Tuli Hutala. It is called Vika, and it is a 2x2 ribbed hat where the ribs alternate. Super cool, very fun. Super easy pattern, supposedly. And yeah, this one is made in 3mm needles with a gauge of 32 stitches by 30 rounds. So again, a smaller stitch pattern, which I like it when I see those in here because they're all such big like gauges. Yeah, and I think this is also one that like I will probably try in the near future because it intrigues me, although it's a seemingly simple construction. The next one is another sweater, and this one is Brizna by Elena Solier Jansa. It is a very boxy sweater, so it's a very like has a lot of positive ease, and it features the slipped stitch rib on the side, and yeah, it's knit up in a gauge of 17 stitches by 28 rows and 10 centimeters on 4.5 and 3.75mm needles. This one was also like on my list, and then I realized it's gonna be a bit too boxy for me, and before I did all the alternations I ended up like going for a different sweater design. The next pattern is another super easy pattern. This one is called Softy. It is pattern number 33, also by Jonna Hietala, and it is like just a chunky or like a squishy hat in 1x1 ribbing, I believe, and it is at a gauge of 18 stitches. So this one is at a chunkier gauge again, knit on 5mm needles. Again, a really nice pattern to have in here, just like your basic hat 1x1 ribbing, but it tucks you through it, which I think is really nice. The next sweater is also one that I marked. I have these little bookmarks in here. That one is pattern number 34. It is called City or Cité by Faiza Mebaza, and it is a really cool like textured sweater featuring different stitches that kind of lives off of the color combination that you choose for it. It is also knit up in different types of yarns, which is really interesting. And also the reason I haven't made it yet, because I felt like I couldn't find the right yarns to really give me the product that I'm seeing here. It is knit at a gauge of 14.5 stitches by 24 rows and on 5.5 needles, on 6mm needles. Yeah, and it features like different stitches in different colors, which is cool, kind of like color blocks. The next scarf is by Natalia Berezinka. It is pattern number 35 and it is called Knit Word. And that is because it is a scarf that has knit written all over it. It's knit at a gauge of 17 stitches by 20 rows in stockinette stitch on a 5mm needles. And I'm gonna be honest, I have to say I don't love this pattern. I don't know, I'm gonna just go past it. The next pattern, however, is one that I've actually made. It is the Elsa gloves by Maya Kangsaluoma, and they are these 2x2 pearl knit ribbed like gloves, but you alternate the pearl and knit so often throughout the rows that it creates this very like mosaic type pattern, and I thought that was really intriguing and looked really nice and sleek. They're gloves, so they come in 3 sizes, and the suggested gauge is 20 stitches and 40 rounds in this checked pattern after blocking, and they are knit on 3.5mm double pointed needles. I made these gloves and I made size 2 in the Malabrigo Arroyo yarn, and my gauge was 20 to 22 stitches, so around about there, in 10 centimeters, and I made them on 3.5 needles, and they looked amazing. They were gifts, I don't have them to show you, but I'm really happy with how they turned out. Also, this was the first pattern that I made from this book, and like super easy to follow, like amazing instructions. Everything is laid out for you. There's nothing that you have to like use your imagination, use your own like knitting knowledge. It's just all there, and I think that's so nice. But anyways, pattern number 37 is called Tivoli by Jonna Hietala. It is a super chunky sweater in stripes, knit at a gauge of 10 stitches and 13 rounds on 10mm needles, so looks like it's gonna knit up super quickly. Probably the reason I haven't made it. Not sure I will, maybe. I think it's a nice pattern, why not? Pattern number 38 is called Coquette by Maaike van Gijn. It's knit at a gauge of 30 stitches on 2.75mm needles and 3mm needles, and it is like this beret type hat. This is also going in the category of patterns I will not be making of this book, in all honesty, but that's just because it's not my style. I think pattern wise it looks really nice. It looks very like well knit together, very well finished, just not my style, and therefore I'll be flipping past it. Next one is another vest, and it is a striped vest called Kreuzberg by Rebecca Mauser. This is a slip over or a vest featuring all these different stripes. It is suggested that you use 7 different colors for the stripes, but I mean, do whatever you want. And yeah, supposedly it's inspired by the 70s, and like I have to say, I see it and I love it. I love the colors of this one in the sample. It is knit on 3.5 and 4.5mm needles, and it is like on a provisional crochet cast on, so you'll also need a crochet hook for this one. The gauge is 18 stitches by 29 rows on 4.5mm needles. Okay, now we're on to the last chapter divider. These are just all my bookmarks that are in here, don't mind those. But we're heading to patterns 40 through 52. So pattern number 40 is a scarf. It's called Caprioli by Renate Kum. Also comes in 2 sizes, although it is a scarf knit on 17 stitches by 26 rows in this chevron pattern, and that also features like holding 2 different skeins or 2 different colors together and kind of like alternating between holding them together or holding the same color together and so on and so forth. That creates this really cool like color work, I guess you could call it, that is this scarf. I like this one. I might make this one actually, because I don't have that many scarves, and not many at all that I've made myself other than mini scarves. Pattern number 41 is also by Vera Jusila, and this one is called Vimain. And it is this boxy drop-down shoulder sweater that, yeah, I think it's suggested to be like knit in scrap yarn actually, which is cool. I think we rarely see scrap yarn patterns that is a whole sweater. It's knit on a gauge of 16 stitches in 24 rows on 4.5 and 5mm needles. I like this one. If I have enough scrap yarn, I will probably make it, to be honest. Because I also like the color, like the marbling of the colors. Next one is another shawl. It is by Erin Jensen. It is pattern number 42, the Poseidon Ridge, and this one is really like intricate, it seems. It has a gauge of 14.5 stitches and 24 rows in this like half twisted rib stitch, knit on 6 and 7mm needles. I think what's there not to love about a shawl that covers your entire body that you can almost wear as a top? Now they group pattern 43 through 45 together because it's kind of like a set, I guess, that you can make matching, and that is a hat, gloves or fingerless gloves, and this scarf. I mean, they grouped it together, I guess, because they use the same yarn to make it, but of course you can make these separately and use different yarns and then it won't look like a set at all. It is called Joyce, and it's all made in a gauge of 17 stitches by 25 rows in stockinette stitch on 5mm needles. So this, I guess, is your basic hat, scarf and fingerless glove set. Personally, I'm not a big fan of fingerless gloves, so I don't think I'll be making them. I like mittens and I like gloves, but I don't want my fingers to be sticking out because that's the coldest part anyways. So I don't think I'll be making those, but the hat and the scarf, sure, why not? Not in these colors, these are not my colors, but nice to have in here. Pattern number 46 is called Glow. It is a headband by Lerke Bolt Back, and is a super easy pattern. It's knitted in the round, and it is knit in a twisted rib, I believe, at a gauge of 18 stitches by 28 rows on 4mm needles. And yeah, I guess nothing much to say about a simple, nice headband. Pattern 47 is called Color Field, and this is one of my favorite patterns in this book, actually, because it is this scarf that kind of like has a zigzag edging. It comes in one size and is knit in a gauge of 15 stitches by 28 rows in garter stitch, 6mm needles. And I just love the like mosaic, like the quarter or the squares kind of like configuration of those. I think it's really pretty. I love the colors. I love the simplicity of the garter stitch, and I might just make this one pretty soon, I think. Pattern number 48, however, is one that I don't think I'll be making anytime soon. It is another fingerless glove pattern. This one is by Paulina Kuonsola. It's called Vapuka. These fingerless mittens featuring different like pearl and knit patterns or knit combination to make this pattern. The gauge is 16 stitches by 30 rounds. They're knit on 4mm double pointed needles. Pattern number 49 is called Earnest. It is another balaclava, and this one is also by Jana Hietala. This one is a super thick, bulky gauge, and yeah, knit at a gauge of 12 stitches on 4 and 6.5mm needles, and it is half fisherman's stitch in here. Now we're nearing the end. Pattern number 50 is by Aatu Aikie. I think I'm not the best at pronouncing Finnish names, I'm so sorry. But it is called Sysku, and it is also a super easy pattern, and essentially this cute hat with a little pom-pom at the end. Of course, add the pom-pom or not, like up to you. Probably if I were to make it, I would not add the pom-pom, but that's just my personal preference. It's knit at a smaller gauge of 23 stitches by 34 rows, and it's knit on 2.5 and 3.5mm needles, and it's also a super easy pattern. The next pattern is pattern 51. It is called Funky Turtle. I love this pattern a lot, actually. The designer is Teti Lutsak, and it is like this very fun color work, but seemingly simple color work because it doesn't like alternate the strands too often, encompassing also like some different like textures throughout the sweater. This one is knit on 3.5 and 4mm needles, and the gauge is 19 stitches by 22 rounds. Then that leads us to the last pattern of the book, and that is pattern 52. It is called Yutu. It is another cardigan, and I'm a big fan of this one. It is by Isabel Kramer, and it is a top-down knitted cardigan, or constructed cardigan, I should say. Also like kind of living off of the knitting purling combinations. This one is knit in a gauge of 20 stitches by 28 rows on 4mm in stockinette stitch, and yeah, you use 4mm and 3.75mm needles for this one. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this quick overview of all the patterns. Of course, there's so many here, I can't really go into detail, but now let's get into what I think the pros and the cons are of this book. So I think the pros of this book are that it is a really big collection of a lot of easy patterns. So I guess that's like what the title says, but I think if you are a beginner, I think this book would be a really good start for you, because it's a lot less overwhelming than like the Ravelry homepage, than your Instagram For You page if you have that full of knitting, as many of us do. I think this is a really nice overview, even classifying the super easy patterns if you're a beginner. So I think that's what this book does well. It really breaks it down. It has a lot of details written in each pattern, details that experienced knitters, that more like seasoned knitters will probably skip over, because they're like, yeah, of course I know that, like, duh. But I think if you're a beginner and if you're just kind of like figuring out what you do like, how different yarns work, like all those type of things, and I think this is a really good, maybe even first knitting book for you. So that's what I also like about this book. Like if I want to make a pattern that like I know is gonna be explained well, I know I can kind of like mindlessly knit, then I will turn to this book. I think in terms of like all the accessories, they're all really like accessible. They don't involve more than knitting and purling in most cases. Some of the sweaters involve like a little pattern here, a little like color work there. But if I want like an easy knit that I can kind of like rely on, then this is my go-to book. The second thing I really like about this book is the structure and the images. So it features like beautiful, well photographed images with like the same few models in here. It's just a nice book to flip through. It's like, it's a nice, like even if I'm not like looking for a pattern, I might flip through it, you know, because it's just like, it makes me happy flipping through it. So that's the second thing I like about this book. The next thing I think that you have to mention about this book is how many patterns there are for the price that you pay. So even say if you pay 40 euros, which is kind of like the higher end, realistically you pay like 37 or something, you're getting 52 patterns. And so I checked what the patterns individually are, and they're anything between like say 4 euros and 7 euros, at least from what I saw. So I think value-wise, you're getting a really good deal here with this book. Okay, then another thing is I think the sizing is pretty good, like 8 different sizes for all the tops. I think is really nice, especially in a collection of patterns from different designers, because not everyone designs in like 8 different sizes. So I think that's also a really nice point to this, and also that we're getting different sizes with the gloves and different sizes with the socks, and sometimes even 2 sizes with the scarves. That's also not a given, and I think therefore is one of my positives about this book. So now to the things that I don't like so much about this book. I think the obvious one is that like, and maybe you have to see the book for what it is, but I wish there was like a little bit more like of a challenge in this book. It is kind of all based off of knits and purls, and I think, yeah, maybe this is less of a con and more of a like taking it for what it is, because it is a book for beginners. So I think if you're advanced, this is not the book that will be super inspiring. There's no cabling in here, there's no lace in here, there's no like complicated constructions, there's no like embroidery, there's none of that, you know, extra difficult things that is super engaging if you're more advanced. So I think for me, it's like, I have this book and I like that I have it, but sometimes I'm like, oh, I just wish there was like a little bit more to it, I guess. So yeah, I guess it's a con, but also take it for what it is. Like, it is a beginner knitting book. The second thing I don't love in here is that like a lot of, especially like the accessories, like they're just very simple. Like they're really, I feel like even a beginner, or like even a beginner, if you even want to say it like that, like there could be a little bit more like to a hat, or I don't know. I just feel like there is a little bit of potential that wasn't fully used in this book. So yeah, I hope I'm like making that point even. Another thing that I should mention about this book is that there are some errors in it. So I guess it's a con, but it is also something that Lane Publishing has acknowledged and has fixed. So they have this website, it's called the Errata List. RRATA, where they essentially, like, of all their books as well, acknowledge that this pattern has an error here and there, and then it's essentially like a PDF with all the errors within a certain book. So you can go to the website, go check that list out before you start a pattern, maybe in case your one has an error. I think for this one there's like 5 or 6 patterns that have like a small error somewhere, and of course, like, it's humans, they say this as well in the book, like, it's humans that write these patterns, so please, like, be okay with that. Here's how we fix it. Another thing that I dislike about this book a little bit is that the cover is super flimsy. Like, it's not a hardcover, and I think if I'm spending 40 euros on a book, I would like a hardcover. I'm not sure if they make a hardcover. Like, in the description it says it's a hardcover, but it's not. So I don't know. Let me know if you own this as a hardcover, I guess. But it's just, with a knitting book, it's always lying open somewhere, and it doesn't really lie super flat either. So when you're kind of working according to a chart for a long time, like I've had to use clips to keep it open, that's just something very small, and just, you know, maybe that would have been nice, because it is a knitting book, right? It's not a book that you read like this and you're just like looking at all the time. So I think the conclusion is that, who do I think this book is great for? I think this book is great for beginners. Like, if you are really, like, you figured out how to knit and you figured out how to purl and you're ready to take on that next step, go get yourself this book. You will not find the patterns at a more, like, at a more economic price, I don't think, especially because there's so many in here and you're spending more money individually. So if you've just, like, or even if you're okay with just like simple patterns, that this is a great book for you. If you say you're a TV knitter, you want to knit in front of the TV, you don't want to look up every single line of, I don't know, a really complicated like lace pattern, then go for it. Like, this will be a really nice kind of chill knitting book for you. And I think if you're in any of those categories, then this is a great book for you. On the other hand, if you are a seasoned knitter who knows their lace, who knows their cables, who is not gonna touch like an easy stockinette pair of gloves, then I don't think this is for you. I think your money's better off, better spent somewhere else. But I think you also know that from looking at the title, I guess. Yeah, I enjoy this book. I would definitely recommend it. I have and will knit more things out of this book. I think one thing I will mention is I still don't know why it's called 52 weeks of easy knits. Like, if someone knows that, please leave a comment down below. I have no idea. Like, I'm not gonna spend the next year of 52 weeks making these knits. I don't know if that's the idea. I'm not sure, but maybe it's just a marketing thing. But anyways, I'll leave it here for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a comment down below, like this video, maybe even subscribe and all those things. Hopefully I was able to give you a little bit of an insight to this beautiful book for beginner knitters, I guess. And yeah, I hope to see you in the next one, and until then, take care. Bye.